So how does the system of ancient warrior chiefs manage to take control of an entire nation? And then how does that same system get completely transformed by a global empire only to be dramatically torn down over a century later? Well, today we're jumping right into the incredible, complex story of Fiji's chiefly kingdom.
And I want to start with these words right here. This is a desperate plea from a man named Ratu Seru Cakobau, who would become the first and actually the only king of Fiji. He's at a total breaking point, and this quote, it just perfectly captures the high-stakes drama that's about to unfold.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to start in a land of rival warring chiefdoms. Then we'll follow the rise of one particularly ambitious warlord. We'll look at the incredible dilemma that forced his hand, and then see how an empire kind of ironically made the system it just took over even stronger. And finally, we'll witness its sudden, dramatic end. Okay, so to understand how a king could even come to power, you first have to picture the world he came from. And let me tell you, it was a Fiji that was anything but a single unified country.
Think about the early 1800s. Fiji wasn't one place. It was this collection of islands dominated by powerful chiefdoms, and they were always competing. Power was totally fluid, alliances could change in an instant, and war was just a part of politics. There was no central government, just this constant shifting struggle for dominance.
And at the very heart of that struggle were two major players. On one side, you had Bao, this ambitious, hungry, expansionist chiefdom, and on the other, you had Rewa, the more established kingdom. For decades, their rivalry was basically the engine driving all of Fijian politics.
Which brings us to our main character, a man who clawed his way out of all this chaos, earning himself a pretty fearsome reputation along the way, Ratu Seru Cakobau. His name, get this, could literally be translated as Destroyer of Bao.
Now, before he was a king, Cakobau held this title, the Vunavalu. And this wasn't just some fancy ceremonial role. Nope, it means war chief. This was the source of his real power, making him the supreme military commander of the most aggressive and feared confederacy in all of Fiji.
So how did he do it? Well, his path to the top was a clear and, let's be honest, a pretty brutal strategy. First, lock down your home base, Bao. Next, take out the competition, which meant a long, bloody war with his main rival, Rewa. The real game-changer, though, was a strategic alliance he made with some powerful Tongan warriors. That sealed his victory. And with no one left to challenge him, he made his final move, declaring himself king of all Fiji in 1871.
But here's the thing. Building a kingdom is one thing. Actually holding it together, that's a whole different ballgame. And Cakobau's brand new kingdom was immediately getting squeezed from all sides.
It was truly a perfect storm. He had conflicts with European settlers popping up everywhere. His supposed Tongan allies were constantly scheming against him. Plus, a lot of other Fijian chiefdoms just flat out didn't recognize him as king. But the biggest problem, the one that was about to bring the whole thing crashing down, was a massive, unpayable international debt.
And here it is. This is the number that basically broke the kingdom's back. $44,000. The U.S. government blamed Cakobau for a fire that happened years earlier at its consul's house, and they wanted to be paid back. He was staring down the threat of an American invasion, and he had absolutely no way to pay this debt. He was trapped.
And you can just feel the desperation in his words here. He saw these encroaching colonial powers, what he called the white stalkers on the beach, as this monster that was just waiting to swallow them whole. The pressure was just too much. He knew he had to make a choice, and fast.
So he made a strategic, if totally desperate move. On October 10, 1874, just 3 years after he'd created his kingdom, Cakobau gave it all away. He ceded Fiji to Great Britain. He handed his crown over to the most powerful chief he could think of, Queen Victoria, all in a last-ditch effort to stop his people from being picked up like driftwood.
Now, you'd think that's where the story of chiefly power ends, right? But what happens next is the great paradox of this whole story. Instead of getting rid of the chiefs, British colonial rule actually made their system stronger and more locked in than it had ever been before.
See, the British figured out pretty quickly it was way easier to rule through the chiefs than to try and rule against them. So they created what we now call a neo-traditional order. Basically, they took this really complex, fluid, traditional system and they simplified it, they formalized it, and they wrote it into law. They gave the chiefs a new, official, and very powerful role in the colonial government.
And you can really see the transformation here. The old system of shifting alliances, gone, replaced by a rigid, formal provincial structure. Power that used to be won through war,
Now it was defined by colonial law. And, this is the big one, where before there was no single central body, the British created something new, the Great Council of Chiefs. And this is the point that you just have to get. The Great Council of Chiefs, the institution that for the next 136 years would be seen as the ultimate symbol of Fijian tradition, wasn't some ancient pre-colonial thing. It was an invention. It was created by the British to be the top of their new administrative pyramid.
Okay, let's fast forward about a century. Fiji gains its independence, and this whole colonial era system starts facing a whole new set of problems. This sets the stage for the final, really dramatic act in our story, a head-on collision between tradition and modernity.
After independence in 1970, things got pretty turbulent. That carefully built colonial order started to come apart at the seams. A series of military coups, starting back in 1987, really shook the nation. And with each one, the political power of the chiefs slowly eroded, and you started to see deep cracks forming within the establishment itself.
And you can see how quickly things started to unravel. The coups in '87 and 2000 really shook the system to its core. But the 2006 coup, led by Commodore Frank Bainimarama, that one was different. He wasn't just challenging the government, he was challenging the entire traditionalist ideology. And it all came to a head in 2012 when his regime did what was once unthinkable. It completely abolished the Great Council of Chiefs, just like that, with the stroke of a pen.
So what was the official justification? Well, here it is. Bainimarama didn't frame the council as some sacred traditional body. Instead, he called it a product of our colonial past. He argued that if Fiji was going to build a modern, equal society for everyone, this relic had to go.
And this was not just talk. They took real, concrete steps to take apart that old order. They changed the rules for land lease payments, so the money went to all members of a clan, not just the chief. They got rid of the Senate, which had been a major source of political power for the chiefs. And they started pushing for a new, inclusive national identity that applied to every single citizen.
This whole revolution in thinking was really put to the test in the 2014 election. And the result? A landslide victory for Bainimarama's modernizing political party. To a lot of people, this looked like a huge shift in the country's mindset, a clear public vote for a new vision of Fiji, one that wasn't based on the old chiefly order anymore.
Which leaves us with a final big question. The story of Fiji, from warring chiefs to a colonial-backed council to its sudden end, is just such a powerful case study. It forces us to ask something that goes way beyond the Pacific. In our modern globalized world, what really is the role of traditional authority anymore?